The ballroom at the Plaza Hotel should have been silent, dignified, and filled only with the soft hum of violins. Instead, it shook with the sound of children crying, two small voices refusing to be silenced. 5-year-old twins, Michael and Madison Cole, clung to each other at the foot of the altar, their tears cutting through the carefully staged perfection of New York's most extravagant wedding of the year. Hundreds of guests, Wall Street tycoons, celebrities, and politicians, turned their heads in irritation, then in curiosity. This was supposed to be the moment when their father, billionaire CEO Richard Cole, finally sealed his new future with Vanessa Blake, a woman known for her beauty, her ambition, and her hunger for influence. But the twins would not stop. Their cries weren't the tantrums of spoiled children. No, there was something sharper in their voices, something urgent, something that made the hair on the back of Officer Darnell Hayes's neck stand on end. Darnell wasn't a guest. He wasn't part of the family. He was just the cop in uniform, stationed at the back of the room, hired to stand still, watch the crowd, and keep trouble outside the doors. But what he saw at the altar told him trouble was already here. The bride leaned down, her perfect white gown brushing the marble floor, her lips barely moving as she hissed at the children through her teeth. Whatever she whispered, it made Madison shrink back and grip tighter onto her brother's hand. The girl's eyes darted around the room as if searching for help, but no one moved. Not their father, not the family, not the guests who sat uncomfortably in their seats, pretending nothing unusual was happening. And then, in the middle of the chaos, something slipped. A plain white envelope fell from Madison's small toy bag and landed quietly on the carpet. No one saw it, except Officer Hayes. He felt his breath catch. He didn't know why, he didn't know what was inside. But some part of him already knew this envelope mattered. At that moment, the twins' cries rose louder, echoing through the ballroom like an alarm no one wanted to hear, and the question hung in the air, unanswered, unspoken, heavy enough to choke every person in that room. What were they trying to warn everyone about? If you're already hooked and want to uncover the truth hidden inside this wedding, the secrets the twins carried, the choice the cop had to make, and the moment that shattered a billionaire's perfect life, make sure you subscribe right now. Don't miss the chapters ahead, because what's coming next will change everything. Officer Darnell Hayes stood in his pressed NYPD blues at the far end of the ballroom, hands folded in front of him, the weight of duty heavy across his shoulders. His job was simple: remain invisible, keep order, and ensure no scandal touched this most public of weddings. Yet from where he stood, it was impossible not to feel the fracture forming at the center of the celebration. Darnell had been in enough chaotic situations: street corners in the Bronx, Friday night brawls in Harlem, protests where words turned to fists, to know the difference between noise and alarm. What those children were doing wasn't noise. It was closer to a warning, and warnings, he had learned, were rarely taken seriously until it was too late. He scanned the crowd. Wealth, power, and entitlement sat polished in every row. Senators, hedge fund managers, Hollywood stars, all dressed in tailored suits and glittering gowns, but their eyes were sharp and judgmental, cutting through the cries of the twins as if they were an inconvenience rather than a plea for help. And then there was Richard Cole, the billionaire groom, broad-shouldered, perfectly groomed, a man used to control. Yet at that moment his face betrayed him. He looked exhausted. His jaw tightened, his eyes flickered between his bride-to-be and his children, and for just a heartbeat, Darnell saw something human, fear, maybe, or guilt. It vanished quickly, replaced by the carefully constructed image of a man untouchable, but the children weren't letting go. Their small hands clutched a worn blue toy car between them, like it was the last piece of their world they could trust. Darnell's eyes locked onto it. Something about that toy, simple, scratched, old, felt out of place in a room dripping with chandeliers and gold trim. It was as though the children were clinging to the memory of a life that had been stolen from them. Vanessa Blake, the bride, shifted. Her smile was porcelain perfect for the crowd, but when she leaned close to whisper at the children again, the mask slipped. Darnell caught the flash in her eyes, cold and unyielding. Whatever she said made Michael flinch so hard, his small body trembled. Vanessa straightened her back again, her lips curving into a rehearsed sweetness as cameras clicked and recorded her every angle. Darnell felt the weight of eyes on him too. Guests didn't bother hiding it. To them, he wasn't part of the fairy tale, just the hired officer, a black man standing where he didn't belong. He could hear the faint whispers. "Why do they even need cops here? It's a wedding, not a street corner." Another voice muttered, "The Coles don't need men like him ruining their photos." He pretended not to hear. He'd been trained to, but his jaw tightened just the same. And then it happened again. His gaze fell on that white envelope lying half-hidden beneath the girl's toy bag. No one else noticed, but the way it rested there, as if waiting for him, was almost unbearable. Darnell shifted on his feet. His instincts screamed. He wanted to step forward, to take it, to know. But he stayed rooted in place. Because in this room, he wasn't just a man. He was a cop under orders. And one wrong move could end not only his career, but his chance of protecting the very people crying out in front of him. Still, deep down, he felt it. This wasn't just a wedding. It was something else, something that had already begun unraveling. And soon, he would have to decide. Would he remain the silent guard in the shadows, or step into the light where every move was a risk? And as you're listening right now, ask yourself, if you were in Officer Hayes's position, watching two children cry for help while everyone else ignored them, would you stay silent, or would you step forward? Think about it, and if you want to see how Darnell's decision changes everything, make sure you're subscribed. The story is just beginning. Vanessa Blake had built her entire reputation on appearances. For years, society magazines adored her. Her face appeared at charity galas, her name whispered at fundraisers, her dresses studied by fashion critics. She knew how to play her role, the flawless partner, the vision of elegance. And tonight, she had finally secured her greatest prize, Richard Cole, the billionaire whose empire stretched from Wall Street to Silicon Valley. The cameras adored her. Every tilt of her head, every slight curve of her smile was calculated perfection. But behind that porcelain mask, something far less polished lurked. The twins' cries had cut into her moment like glass dragged across silk. And though she never broke for the flashing lights, the truth was written in the tiniest details. The twitch at the corner of her mouth, the stiffness in her neck, the fire in her eyes each time she glanced down at the children. She leaned forward, her lips close to Madison's ear. The words were quiet, but the venom in them carried weight. "You will stop this, or you will regret it." Madison's sobs turned sharp, panicked. Michael tried to shield her, his tiny arm wrapping around his sister's shoulders as if he could take the threat onto himself. And for 1 second, Vanessa's perfectly manicured hand twitched, as though she might snatch the toy car away from them. But she stopped. Not here, not in front of this many witnesses. Still, the damage was done. The children flinched at her every move. Richard, standing tall at her side, looked down at the twins with an expression that betrayed the cracks forming in his carefully groomed image. His voice was low, frustrated. "Enough, please, not now." But the children didn't stop. They couldn't, and every second of their defiance chipped away at the spectacle Vanessa had built. Guests shifted uncomfortably. A woman in pearls leaned toward her husband and whispered, "Those poor kids, it's like they know something we don't." Her husband shushed her quickly, but the thought had already seeded itself in the air. The master of ceremonies cleared his throat, attempting to move things along, but no one was listening. Everyone was waiting, watching, to see how Vanessa would handle this rebellion. And then it happened. The mask slipped. For just a heartbeat, her face hardened. Not the smiling socialite, not the blushing bride. Something else. Something that made the nearest bridesmaid instinctively step back. But just as quickly, the mask returned. The smile stretched across her lips again, and she reached delicately for Richard's hand as though nothing had happened. Only Darnell noticed the moment. From his place at the back of the room, his eyes narrowed. He had seen faces like that before, not in banquet halls but in interrogation rooms. People who could hide what they were until the exact second the mask cracked. The twins were still crying, clinging to each other. Their voices shook the air, unrelenting, and Vanessa Blake, standing tall in her gown of white lace, whispered again through clenched teeth, words Darnell couldn't hear but could read in the children's terror. This wedding wasn't breaking because of noise. It was breaking because truth was leaking through, and Vanessa could not stop it. The children's cries grew softer for a moment, their small bodies trembling, their tear-streaked faces pressed against each other, but their silence didn't bring peace to the ballroom. If anything, it made the tension sharper, like the pause before a storm. A ripple of whispers began moving through the crowd. They weren't loud enough for the cameras to catch, but Darnell, standing at the back, could hear fragments, the kind of fragments that cut deeper than the words themselves. Emily would have never allowed this. If their mother were alive, those kids wouldn't be acting like this. Poor Richard. He never really recovered from her death. Emily. The name hung in the air like perfume, faint, almost forgotten, but powerful enough to stir old memories. Emily Cole, Richard's first wife, the twins' mother, the woman whose funeral had filled the pages of every society paper just 2 years before. Her death had been described as tragic. A sudden illness, they said. A loss too great for words. Yet even now, in this glittering ballroom, the story didn't sit right with everyone. There were murmurs of unanswered questions. A neighbor who claimed Emily was strong and healthy the week before. A nurse who mentioned medication that had never been prescribed. Loose threads, never tied. Darnell's eyes shifted back to the children. Their small fingers clutched that battered toy car like it was a lifeline. It wasn't just a toy. It was a relic. Something their mother had given them, maybe. Something they weren't willing to let go of, even here, even now. And then another whisper reached him. 2 older women at the back of the crowd leaned toward each other. One said quietly, "Vanessa moved into that house so quickly after Emily's passing. Too quickly, if you ask me." The other woman nodded grimly. Some people grieve, others replace. Their words faded as the master of ceremonies raised his voice again, trying desperately to steer the wedding back on track. But Darnell couldn't unhear it. The threads were there, dangling in front of him, and the children's cries, the bride's cracking mask, the whispers of Emily's name, they weren't separate pieces. They were part of something larger, something that no one in this room wanted to face. Richard Cole's hand twitched at his side, as if he too heard the whispers, as if his mind returned for a moment to his late wife. His jaw tightened. His eyes flicked toward Vanessa, then quickly away. The violinists began to play again, their bows trembling just slightly, as if even the music knew it was lying. The wedding was still moving forward. The bride still stood radiant, the groom still tall, the children still crying. But beneath the chandeliers, beneath the marble, beneath the glittering cameras and whispers, the ghost of Emily Cole stood tall in that room. And though her body had been buried 2 years ago, it was clear to Darnell that her presence had never left. While the orchestra forced its melody across the ballroom, while cameras captured smiles that weren't real, something else sat quietly at the edge of the stage. It wasn't a person, it wasn't a voice, it was an envelope. White, unmarked, slipped beneath the stack of wedding programs like it had no purpose. Most of the guests didn't even notice it. After all, their eyes were fixed on the bride's glittering gown, on the groom's rigid jawline, on the twins whose cries had not yet stopped echoing in their ears. But Darnell, he saw it. Cops are trained to scan a room to catch what others miss. He didn't know why his eyes kept returning to that envelope, but they did. Maybe it was instinct. Maybe it was something deeper. All he knew was this: the envelope didn't belong. From the back, he watched as a server brushed past the table. For a second, the man's hand hovered near it, then pulled away. Too deliberate, like he knew something. Darnell felt his pulse quicken. He couldn't step forward, not yet. He was a guest in this hall, not a detective on duty. But the envelope, it was a thread. And the twins, still clutching their mother's toy car, were another. Threads always led somewhere. As the officiant cleared his throat, preparing to pronounce the vows, a gust from the air vents shifted the envelope slightly, just enough for the edge to curl open, and Darnell saw it. Black ink scrawled across the first page inside. Not elegant calligraphy, not the polished hand of a wedding planner, but jagged, hurried letters, a warning written in haste. For one fleeting moment, he read the first two words, "Ask why." Then the page slipped back into shadow. Nobody else seemed to notice. Nobody else cared. The ceremony moved on, polished and rehearsed. But Darnell couldn't ignore what he'd seen. Those words, that envelope, the way the twins' cries seemed to rise every time their father reached for Vanessa's hand. The question was no longer whether this wedding would finish. It was what would erupt once it did. The music swelled. Cameras flashed. Richard's lips parted, ready to seal the vow with a kiss. And Darnell's eyes locked once more on that envelope. He didn't know it yet, but inside those jagged words lay the first clue to the storm about to tear this family apart. Viewers, let me ask you, what do you think those words could mean? Ask why. Why what? Why the wedding? Why the mother's death? Why the twins won't stop crying? Comment below with your guess. And if you haven't subscribed yet, now's the time, because the next chapter will shatter what everyone thought they knew. The officiant's voice rose above the hum of whispered doubts. Do you, Richard Cole, take this woman? But before the words could finish, before the kiss could seal the vow, the children moved. It was sudden, sharp. Little Michael and Madison, only 6 years old, broke free from the bridesmaid holding them and stumbled into the center aisle. Their sobs had turned to screams now, raw and piercing, echoing across marble floors and crystal chandeliers. Gasps rippled through the guests. Cameras swung. Even the orchestra faltered, their bows scraping across strings in a jagged discord. Michael's small hand shot out, clutching his father's sleeve, his face twisted with fear. His voice, choked and breaking, rang out. "Don't marry her, Daddy!" The words weren't rehearsed. They weren't polite. They cut through the room with the force of something truer than anything else spoken that day. Richard froze. Vanessa's painted smile flickered for a split second, then hardened into something colder. Madison, her twin, clutched that battered toy car tighter, her little chest heaving as she screamed next, "She's not Mommy!" Silence. The kind of silence that doesn't just hang in the air but crushes it. The kind that makes 100 people stop breathing at once. Richard's lips parted as if to speak, but no words came. His hand trembled at his side. The officiant shifted uncomfortably, caught between ritual and disaster. Vanessa reached down, her manicured nails digging into her bouquet. "Richard," she hissed under her breath, her voice just loud enough for the front row to hear, "control your children." But the twins were beyond control. They collapsed at their father's feet, wailing, clinging to his legs as if they were trying to anchor him to the past, to their mother, to the truth no one dared speak. And then, it happened. From the back of the hall, the envelope slid off the table and fluttered onto the floor. No one had touched it. No one had noticed it falling. But the timing was perfect. It landed just beside the children. Darnell's heart lurched. The words he'd glimpsed, "Ask why," burned in his mind. And now, here it was, at the very center of the storm, waiting to be opened. Every camera in the room caught the image. 2 children on the floor, crying, clutching their father's legs, and an envelope lying beside them like a verdict waiting to be read. Richard bent slightly, his hand hovering between his children's shoulders and that mysterious slip of paper. Which would he pick up first? For a long moment, Richard Cole didn't move. His body seemed trapped between two worlds, the future standing beside him in a glittering gown, and the past clinging to his legs, sobbing through tiny voices that refused to be silenced. And then his hand lowered, not to Vanessa, not to the children, but to the envelope. Gasps scattered across the ballroom like sparks. Vanessa's smile snapped, replaced by something sharp, cold, unmasked. She gripped Richard's arm, whispering through clenched teeth, "Leave it. It's nothing." But Richard's fingers had already broken the seal. The orchestra stilled. The officiant froze. The cameras zoomed closer, as though drawn by invisible strings. And slowly, hesitantly, Richard unfolded the letter. The handwriting was jagged, rushed, uneven. The ink smudged in places, as if written with trembling hands. His eyes darted across the page, his face shifting with each line. Darnell, straining from the back, caught only fragments as Richard's lips moved soundlessly. "You never asked. She warned you. The medicine wasn't hers." Richard's face drained of color. His jaw tightened. His chest rose and fell in uneven waves. Finally, his lips formed the words aloud, words that struck the ballroom silent. "Ask why Emily died." The name, spoken out loud. The name everyone had been whispering in corners, too afraid to say in the open. Emily, the late wife, the children's mother. The ghost standing taller with every mention. The guests shifted uneasily, exchanging glances. A murmur swept through the hall, one question spreading like fire. What did he mean? Vanessa's voice cut through, shrill, almost desperate. "This is absurd! Some prank, some intrusion! Richard, tear it up, now!" But Richard didn't. His hands trembled, the paper crinkling between his fingers. He looked at the twins, at the toy car they clutched, and for the first time since the ceremony began, tears welled in his eyes. Darnell felt a chill crawl down his spine. The timing, the words, the children's cries. It wasn't random. It was orchestrated. But by whom? And why here, in front of everyone? The letter slipped from Richard's hands and fell to the floor, its words now exposed for the cameras, for the guests, for anyone who dared to look. Ask why Emily died. And ask who wanted her gone. For a heartbeat, the ballroom held its breath. The letter lay on the polished floor like a dagger. The words, "Ask why Emily died. Ask who wanted her gone," burned in every mind present. And then Vanessa snapped. Her voice rose, sharp and cutting, shattering the fragile silence. "This is madness. Who planted that letter? Who dares bring lies into my wedding?" She stepped forward, her heels clattering against the marble, her bouquet trembling in her hands. The mask she had worn all night, the perfect bride, flawless and composed, crumbled in an instant. "This is jealousy," she cried, her voice shrill. "It's envy from people who can't stand to see us happy. Richard, don't you see? They want to destroy us." But her outburst only fed the unease. Guests exchanged uneasy glances. The whispers multiplied. Cameras zoomed closer. Even the officiant stepped back, as though fearing he was standing too close to a storm. The twins clung tighter to their father's legs, their cries returning with fresh force. Madison's small voice broke through Vanessa's tirade. "She's lying, Daddy. Mommy told us." Gasps erupted. Heads swiveled. Vanessa's face froze, then twisted with something darker. "Shut those children up," she snapped, her words louder than she intended, harsher than any stepmother-to-be should have spoken. The crowd recoiled. A ripple of shock coursed through the ballroom. And in that single, unguarded moment, Vanessa's image shattered for everyone watching. Richard's eyes widened, his jaw tightening as he pulled his children closer. It was subtle, almost instinctual. A father shielding his own. And Darnell, still at the back, felt his training sharpen inside him. He'd seen breakdowns before, seen guilty hands try to clutch control when truth slipped through their fingers. Vanessa wasn't defending herself. She was cracking. But before anyone could move, Vanessa whirled around. Her finger jabbed toward the cameras, her voice trembling with fury. "Turn them off, all of them. This is a private ceremony. This is harassment. Richard, make them stop." But the cameras didn't stop. They zoomed in tighter. The nation was watching now. And at that moment, Vanessa realized something she had fought to ignore all night. The letter wasn't just a piece of paper. It was a spotlight. And that spotlight was exposing her. The ballroom had descended into chaos. The officiant stepped aside. Guests whispered louder, their murmurs rising like a storm tide. The twins clung to their father. Cameras caught every flicker, every tremor. And then, from the back of the room, a voice cut through it all. Calm, steady, unshaken. "Richard, she knows." Every head turned. It was a man, middle-aged, tall, his suit pressed but plain. His face was unfamiliar to most, but his voice carried authority. A few guests whispered his name in shock. Dr. Alan Mercer, Emily's physician, the man who had signed her death certificate. Richard's jaw tightened. His eyes darted to Vanessa, whose face had gone pale beneath her makeup. "What are you doing here, Alan?" Richard asked, his voice low but trembling. The doctor stepped forward, his eyes never leaving Vanessa. "I wasn't invited, but when I heard about this wedding, I couldn't stay silent anymore. Too much has been buried. Too much has been ignored." The crowd gasped. Phones lifted higher. The nation leaned in through screens. Vanessa's voice cracked like glass. "You don't belong here. Security, get him out. He's a bitter man with grudges. He's lying." But Dr. Mercer didn't flinch. His words were deliberate, each one slicing through the air. "Emily's death wasn't sudden. It wasn't random. And it wasn't natural." A wave of shock spread across the hall. Guests clutched their pearls, their champagne glasses, their partners' arms. Richard staggered back, his hand tightening on his children's shoulders. "What are you saying, Alan?" The doctor's eyes darkened. He paused, letting silence squeeze the room before he spoke again. "I'm saying your wife was poisoned." The ballroom erupted. Cries of disbelief, shouts, a glass shattering against the floor. Cameramen nearly dropping their equipment as they scrambled to zoom in closer. Vanessa's bouquet slipped from her hands, hitting the marble with a dull thud. Her lips parted, but no words came. And at that moment, every eye in the room turned toward her. Was it grief on her face? Was it shock? Or was it fear that the truth she thought buried had finally clawed its way back to the surface? Darnell's instincts roared to life. A poisoned wife, a panicked bride, a grieving billionaire groom standing in the eye of the storm. This wasn't just a wedding anymore. It was a crime scene waiting to be uncovered. And though the first twist had been revealed, Darnell knew with every fiber of his being, there was still another one waiting in the shadows. The word poisoned still hung in the air like smoke after an explosion. The guests were no longer whispering. They were buzzing, their voices overlapping in waves of shock. Phones flashed, live streams spiked. Millions were watching now, not just a wedding, but the unraveling of a powerful family's secrets. Vanessa stood frozen, her bouquet on the floor, her hands trembling at her sides. For a moment it looked like she might collapse under the weight of it all. But then her head snapped up. Her voice, sharp and venomous, cut through the crowd. "Enough! This is nothing but slander, lies from a bitter man who resented my place in this family from the very beginning." She pointed a manicured finger directly at Dr. Mercer. "You think you can destroy me with your stories? You were the one prescribing her medicine, weren't you? You were the one who failed to save her. Don't twist your failure into my crime." Gasps. Heads turned. The accusation hit like lightning. Richard staggered, his face pale, torn between two voices, the calm certainty of the doctor and the desperate fury of the woman he was about to marry. Vanessa wasn't finished. She spun on the guests, her voice trembling with righteous indignation. "All of you, do you really think I would hurt Emily? That I would poison the mother of these children? I loved her like a sister." But her words cracked on that last note. Too sharp, too defensive. The twins clung tighter to Richard. Madison's small voice whispered, barely audible but caught by the microphones. "Daddy, she's lying." The crowd rippled with unease. Even the orchestra, who had tried to resume playing softly in the background, stopped altogether. Vanessa's mask was slipping, and she knew it. Her eyes darted across the room, searching for allies, anyone who might believe her. But the faces staring back were uncertain, doubtful, hungry for the truth. Finally, she turned back to Richard, her voice breaking. "Don't you see what's happening? They're trying to ruin us, Richard. They don't want you to be happy. They don't want me to be your wife. Don't you dare let them win." Tears glistened in her eyes. She reached for him, trembling fingers stretching toward his hand. But Richard didn't move. His eyes lingered on the letter still lying on the floor. His children pressed against his legs, and his mind, heavy with doubt, seemed to circle the same question written in jagged ink. Ask why Emily died. And for the first time, Vanessa realized she was no longer fighting the doctor, or the guests, or the cameras. She was fighting against the memory of Emily, and Emily was winning. The ballroom had grown unbearably tense. Vanessa's cries still echoed in the marble, but they no longer carried weight. Her words floated above the crowd like broken glass, sharp but fragile. And then, a smaller voice rose. Michael, his tiny hands still clutching his father's sleeve, tilted his tear-streaked face upward. His voice cracked, but it carried more power than Vanessa's fury. "Daddy, Mommy told us before she went away. She said if we were ever scared, we should tell you." The room went still. Cameras zoomed in. The nation leaned forward. Richard dropped to one knee, his trembling hands gripping his son's shoulders. "What did she tell you, son?" Madison spoke next, her tiny fingers gripping that battered toy car so tightly her knuckles turned white. She said, "Don't let the lady with the perfume take care of us." The words hit Richard like a blow. His eyes flicked upward, past his children, past the murmuring guests, straight to Vanessa. Her face drained of color. The crowd gasped, whispers flooding the room like rising water. The lady with the perfume. Every woman there wore designer scents, but only one had been whispered about since the beginning. Only one had moved into Richard's home too soon, too comfortably, after Emily's funeral. Vanessa's lips trembled. "They're children. They don't understand what they're saying." But Michael shook his head fiercely. His little voice rose, trembling but resolute. "It was her perfume, Daddy. The same one she wore when she tucked us in at night. Mommy said it made her feel sick." A shocked murmur spread through the crowd. Some guests covered their mouths. Others pointed toward Vanessa with eyes wide in disbelief. Richard staggered, his breathing shallow, torn between rage and heartbreak. The children's words were not evidence in a courtroom, but in that ballroom they were more powerful than any testimony. Darnell, watching from the back, felt the pieces falling into place. The cries, the letter, the doctor's warning, the children's memory. It wasn't just suspicion anymore. It was a pattern. And patterns don't lie. Vanessa's voice cracked, shrill with desperation. "They're lying. You think children know the difference between grief and reality? You think they—" But no one was listening to her anymore. All eyes were on Richard. His children clung to him, whispering truths their mother had left behind. And in that moment, for the first time, Richard looked at Vanessa not as his bride, but as the woman standing in the shadow of his dead wife. Viewers, let me ask you, do you think the twins' memory proves guilt, or could it be a tragic misunderstanding born of grief? Comment your thoughts below, and if you haven't subscribed yet, do it now, because the next chapter sets up the second and final shocking twist, one that changes everything again. The air in the ballroom was suffocating now. The twins clung to their father, their voices still echoing. "The lady with the perfume." Vanessa stood trembling, her painted mask in ruins. Everyone thought the scandal had peaked. Everyone thought the accusations couldn't go further. But then Dr. Mercer spoke again. His voice was calm, almost steady, but it carried the weight of a stone dropped into still water. "You're all looking in the wrong place." The crowd froze. Richard's head snapped toward him, confusion etched in every line of his face. "What are you saying, Alan?" The doctor's eyes narrowed. "Yes, Emily was poisoned, but it wasn't Vanessa's perfume. That was only the smoke, not the fire." A wave of murmurs rippled through the guests. Vanessa's trembling hands stilled for just a moment, her eyes darting toward him in disbelief. Or was it relief? Dr. Mercer stepped closer, his gaze locked on Richard. "The medication Emily was prescribed, it wasn't hers. The dosages were wrong, fatal, and those prescriptions were signed with your name." The ballroom erupted like a bomb had gone off. Richard staggered back as if struck. My name? That's impossible." But the doctor pressed on, his voice unflinching. "I kept the records. I confronted the hospital at the time, but the case was buried. Money was moved. Doors were closed. Someone powerful wanted it silenced. And Richard, that someone had access to your name, your accounts, your household." Gasps, shouts, panic. The crowd swayed like a storm had swept through it. Vanessa's lips curled into a bitter smile, not of triumph, but of something darker. "You see?" she hissed. "I told you. I'm not the one you should fear." But her words didn't clear her name. They only deepened the darkness. Because if it wasn't her, then who in Richard's circle had forged his hand? Who had slipped poison into Emily's life, and why? The twins clung tighter, their small bodies shaking. Madison whispered again, her voice tiny but sharp enough to pierce the silence. "Daddy, Mommy said someone close wanted her gone." Richard's face collapsed under the weight of it all, his bride accused, his doctor revealing hidden truths, his children carrying the last whispers of their mother, and suddenly the glittering wedding was no longer a celebration. It was an interrogation, a reckoning, a stage where ghosts demanded answers. Darnell's instincts screamed in his chest. There was more, much more. The truth wasn't done clawing its way out. The real question now wasn't who would marry Richard Cole, it was who had killed Emily Cole. The ballroom was no longer a place of joy. It had become a battlefield. What began as whispers swelled into shouts. Guests abandoned their tables, forming pockets of angry debate. Some pointed at Vanessa, their voices sharp. "She did it. She's guilty." Others shook their heads, glaring at Richard himself. "No, the doctor wouldn't lie. He forged those prescriptions." Camera phones lit up like stars in the chaos. News outlets that had been invited for the glamorous wedding suddenly had the scoop of the century. Microphones were thrust forward, flashes went off, and Richard's carefully built empire of control was crumbling in real time. Richard raised his hand, desperate to speak. "Please, listen to me," he shouted over the noise. But his voice was swallowed by the storm. Vanessa, makeup streaked, clutching the edge of a table for balance, screamed back at the crowd. "You all hated me from the start. You wanted Emily's ghost to hang over me forever, but I'm not your villain." The twins' cries rose above it all, heartbreak woven into every note. Their small hands clutched at Richard's jacket, dragging him down into their world of grief and fear. And in the shadows, Darnell moved. His training kicked in. He scanned exits, measured body language, and noted the subtle exchange between two sharply dressed men by the bar, men who didn't seem like ordinary guests. Their eyes tracked every word, every outburst, like hawks waiting for a signal. Then Dr. Mercer's voice cut through the storm. "This isn't about opinion. This is about evidence, and I have it." The ballroom fell still, if only for a heartbeat. Every eye turned to him. Dr. Mercer pulled a small envelope from his coat pocket, A simple white envelope, unmarked. He held it high, the way a judge might hold a verdict. In here are copies of the medical records, dates, signatures, dosages, everything I tried to submit before the case was buried. The silence was deafening, but before he could hand it to Richard, one of the men by the bar moved. Swift, deliberate. He crossed the floor in long strides, aiming straight for the envelope. Darnell intercepted him, body slamming into his path. Chairs clattered. The crowd screamed. The wedding had now turned into a war zone. The envelope tumbled to the floor. Guests gasped, reaching, pointing, crying out. Richard lunged for it, but Vanessa was faster. She snatched it up with trembling fingers and pressed it to her chest, eyes blazing. "No," she said, voice shaking but defiant. "This doesn't go to him. Not until I read it. Not until everyone knows what he's been hiding." The crowd roared again. And Richard, pale, broken, furious, stared at the woman he had just promised forever to. "You don't know what you're holding," he growled. But Vanessa only tightened her grip. At that moment, the wedding was no longer a ceremony. It was a trial, and the envelope in Vanessa's hands was the gavel that could destroy them all. The envelope trembled in Vanessa's hands. For a moment, she seemed frozen, torn between fear and resolve, love and survival. The ballroom watched in silence, 1,000 breaths held. Even the twins, exhausted from crying, had gone quiet, sensing the weight of what was about to happen. Richard stepped forward, his voice low, pleading, almost broken. "Vanessa, please, don't do this here. Give it to me and I'll explain." But his words rang hollow, like a door slammed too many times. The crowd had heard enough of his explanations. Vanessa's hand shook as she tore the flap open. Paper rasped against paper. The sound alone made hearts pound faster. She pulled out the documents, her eyes scanning them in disbelief. "Hospital records," she whispered. "Emily Cole, dosage, lethal, prescribed under—" Richard Cole. Gasps, shouts. The ballroom ignited again. Richard's face collapsed into fury. "They're forged! This is a setup, can't you see that?" He turned on Dr. Mercer. "You planted this!" But Dr. Mercer didn't flinch. He simply folded his arms, eyes fixed on the billionaire. "I begged you to take accountability, Richard. You never listened. Now everyone knows." Vanessa's voice cracked as she read further. "There are payments, wire transfers, to a private account, months before Emily's death, thousands of dollars, to someone listed only as RC. The room spun with whispers. RC, Richard Cole, or someone else? The twist dug deeper. Even with the envelope open, the truth wasn't clean. It was layered, dirty, and murky. Vanessa looked up at Richard, tears streaking down her face. "Did you do this?" she demanded. "Did you kill her?" The twins whimpered again, their eyes wide, searching their father's face for an answer he couldn't give. And then, from the back of the room, a voice rang out. Calm, but cold. "No, Vanessa, he didn't." Every head turned. It was one of the sharply dressed men Darnell had been watching, the one he stopped from snatching the envelope. His suit was immaculate, his expression unreadable. He stepped forward, his hands raised as though in surrender. "Richard didn't kill Emily, but someone here did. And if you want the truth, you'll have to follow the money, because that account wasn't his." The room fell into stunned silence. For the first time all night, Richard didn't fight the accusation. He didn't defend himself. Instead, his eyes flickered with something else. Recognition. He knew exactly what the man was talking about. And in that silence, every guest realized, this wasn't just about Richard. This was about something bigger, a conspiracy that reached beyond the man at the altar. The truth was only beginning to surface. The stranger's calm voice cut through the ballroom like a blade. "No, Richard didn't kill Emily, but someone here did. And you've all been looking in the wrong direction." A tremor of unease swept the guests. People shifted, exchanged anxious glances, whispering names under their breath. Richard's lips parted, but no words came. His fists clenched at his sides, veins bulging, as though every instinct screamed for him to speak, yet fear kept him silent. Vanessa's voice quavered. "Then who?" The stranger adjusted his cufflinks with unnerving composure. "The account you just read about, the one marked RC? It doesn't stand for Richard Cole." Every ear strained, every heart thudded. He took one step closer to the center of the room. "It belongs to Rebecca Collins." Gasps exploded through the crowd. Guests turned wildly, searching faces, muttering in disbelief. Rebecca, Richard's personal assistant, the woman who had worked in his office for 10 years. Always at his side, managing his calendar, whispering reminders into his ear during board meetings. Invisible to most, yet present everywhere. The twins stiffened. Jackson's little voice broke the silence. "Mommy didn't like Rebecca. She said Rebecca wanted her gone." The words were daggers, slicing deeper than any accusation. Dr. Mercer's jaw tightened. "I should have known," he muttered. "She had access to the files, the prescriptions, the accounts, everything." All eyes shot toward Rebecca, and there she was, standing near the back of the room, her face pale, her body frozen, as though the world had suddenly tilted beneath her feet. She stammered, her voice cracking. That's not true. Richard, tell them I would never." But Richard's eyes, hollow and heavy, refused to meet hers. He looked away. Vanessa's hand flew to her mouth. "Oh my God!" The stranger's tone sharpened. "She funneled the money. She falsified the records. And she did it for power. Because with Emily gone, Rebecca stood to inherit influence. Control over Richard's empire, over his life, over everything." The ballroom erupted in a storm of voices. Reporters shouted into microphones. Guests shouted over one another. Security closed in, unsure who to protect. Rebecca dropped to her knees, tears spilling down her face. "I didn't mean for it to happen like that. I just wanted her gone." The confession hung in the air like a noose. Richard staggered back, his entire body trembling. Betrayal dripped from every word. His most trusted confidant. The one person who had never left his side. The one he had defended 1,000 times. Vanessa's eyes narrowed. For once she didn't look broken. She looked vindicated. "All this time, and you blamed me." The twins pressed their faces into their father's chest, too young to understand the depth of the treachery, but old enough to feel the cracks spreading through the man they depended on. And Darnell, standing watch in the chaos, realized this wasn't just the unmasking of a killer. This was the unraveling of an empire. Because if Rebecca Collins could bring Richard Cole to his knees, who else had their hands in his empire's blood-soaked rise? The question didn't just haunt Richard. It haunted everyone in that room. The ballroom was a battlefield of shattered vows, broken trust, and unveiled betrayal. Rebecca Collins knelt on the polished floor, mascara streaked down her face, her words collapsing into sobs. "I didn't want her dead. I just wanted her gone. I just wanted my place." Her voice cracked on the last word. My place. Richard stood motionless, his empire, his wedding, his very life unraveling before him. His bride wept in anger and humiliation. His children clung to him in terror, and the guests, the city's most powerful elite, watched as the carefully constructed mask of wealth and perfection fell to pieces. The stranger, the man who had revealed her secret, offered no comfort. Only silence. Only that piercing look that suggested there were still deeper truths untold. Dr. Mercer stepped forward, his voice heavy. "Emily tried to warn us. She knew someone close wanted her gone. She just didn't know how close." Richard's knees buckled. He caught himself on a chair, his face pale as chalk. His empire wasn't built on power alone. It was built on secrets, and now those secrets had claws. Security moved in, gripping Rebecca by the arms, hauling her to her feet. She thrashed, screaming Richard's name, her voice echoing through the ruined hall. You knew I loved you, and you used me. The guests recoiled. Some pitied her, others saw her only as a monster. But all of them knew one thing: this night would never be forgotten. The twins cried again, their small voices cutting through the roar of scandal. Madison whispered, almost too soft to hear, "Daddy, are we safe now?" Richard didn't answer. He couldn't, because deep in his heart, he knew Rebecca wasn't the only hand pulling strings. Her confession felt too raw, too desperate, too reckless. No one orchestrating something this precise would collapse so easily. Someone else was out there, someone higher. And as the flashing lights of police cars painted the ballroom windows in red and blue, Richard realized the truth. This wasn't the end. It was only the beginning. Viewers, what do you think? Was Rebecca truly the mastermind, or just a pawn in a far more dangerous game? And if so, who is still hiding in the shadows, waiting for their turn to strike? Drop your theories in the comments, because your voice might uncover the truth we still don't see. And if you want to follow every twist, every secret, and every cliffhanger we uncover, hit that subscribe button now. Because the next story will take you even deeper. And trust me, the mystery is only getting darker.